We have Brian Dermody today here, who's an assistant professor at the Copernicus Institute for Sustainable Development. And yeah, we will talk about transdisciplinarity in complexity science.
Thanks very much. Now, great to see you all here. Thanks for coming. So today I'm going to talk about this paper we published last year, led by Lindy Acker, who's now a PhD student at Delft, and with a big group of co-authors. And I'll explain first how this came about. And this talk is all about making complexity actionable. So what does that mean? Well, I was asked here at Utrecht, we have okay. I think probably Almira might be playing a role in all of this.
Yeah.
I don't know how many people are online.
Eric is online. But I think you can see the slides from here. So
can I get rid of this?
Yeah, it's nice. I can see them.
You have left the meeting. Great.
I try to zoom in to your slides. So.
Yeah, can I just continue?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, my name is Brian Dermody. I should introduce myself first. Yeah, and I'm an assistant professor at the Copernicus Institute of Sustainable Development. So mostly my research is focused in that realm, all around sustainability. But over the years, I've also been very enthusiastic applicant of complexity science. So I think it's a really important way for gaining insight into how systems work, and especially unsustainable systems, and how we can shift that. And I've done work mostly with agent-based modeling and network analysis within that realm. And a couple of years ago, I was approached by Pathways to Sustainability, which is one of the 4 main strategic themes of Utrecht University, to lead a workshop looking at how we could make complexity science contribute more to sustainable challenges. And so we organized this workshop a few years ago with most of the co-authors in the paper, and we were looking at what are ways in which complexity science can make more meaningful contributions to sustainability. And well, complexity science already is applied a lot within the area of sustainability, of course. So maybe it's good to define, for in case there's people who aren't familiar with complexity science, although I imagine most of you are. I give this talk both to people who are really in the transdisciplinary research field and people who are really in the complexity science field, and those two fields very rarely cross each other. So, but nonetheless, even for me, as somebody who uses complexity science a lot, if someone asks you, yeah, but what is complexity science? Can you define that? And actually, it is quite difficult to do. And in this paper, the way we define it are based on the scientific methods that are used, and give you an overview of some of the main methods we see within the field. So systems dynamics modeling is basically using partial differential equations to understand, often in the context of sustainability, ecosystem dynamics. So this is, I forgot the references. This is from a colleague of mine, Max Riedker, who does a lot of research, for example, on resilience of dryland ecosystems and the tipping points of these. And actually, I see one of you work with Max, so yeah, his students here. So this is one way these types of approaches are used. Also by people, for example, in climate models, these are also based on these kinds of equations, and they look at things like tipping behavior in Atlantic, radial overturning circulation, and other types of systems like that. So all about dynamics. You have another branch of complexity science, which really focuses on structure within systems, and this is the whole area of network analysis. And within the area of sustainability, we have a lot of research going on governance structures, for example. So a colleague of mine, Rat Kim, looks at how different institutions coordinate action around biodiversity loss or climate action by analyzing the network structures. You also have people looking at ecosystem interactions between different organisms under, for example, climate change or nutrient deposition, all these kinds of things. And a big area of study that I'm also particularly interested in is socio-ecological systems analysis. So looking at the structures of interactions between people and the natural world, and how these lead to unsustainable outcomes and how they can be restructured to drive change towards sustainability. And finally, the other main area I want to highlight is agent-based modeling. And this is really focused on understanding what's called emergence. So how large-scale patterns emerge from small-scale interactions. And within the area of sustainability, it's been applied a lot to understand basically multi-actor dynamics. So this could be, for example, colleagues of mine in Copernicus do a lot of work on energy grid modeling, where they're looking at if you have energy grid renewables, and people making all different types of decisions about when to use energy or when to produce energy, what are the emergent dynamics of that and how do you manage such a complex system like that? Or resource use in resource constrained environments. So game theory approaches are often also coming into this area of agent-based modeling also. So that gives you an overview of complexity science and how it's applied to sustainability. But transdisciplinary science, for many of you, this is maybe a term you've heard. We also see that the term is used interchangeably to mean different things. So I think it's also important that I explain it here and what we mean by it in this paper. So transdisciplinary science is basically about integrating knowledge from academia, so academic research, with knowledge from society in order to produce basically useful knowledge, knowledge that can be well applied in society. Because an argument is that a lot of scientific research stays within the academic realm and is not taken up by societal stakeholders and therefore is not applied. And especially when we're talking about sustainability, this is a major concern because we really need things to happen now in order to stop our world basically being destroyed. So it's important that we bridge this gap within sustainability research. And so transdisciplinarity has become a really big topic within sustainability research in the last number of years. And here at Utrecht, we're actually some of the leading universities in this area. And this diagram kind of shows you what we mean by this. So multidisciplinarity is two disciplines that don't really intersect with each other. So if you're multidisciplinary, you learn maybe law and you learn maybe mathematics, but you don't actually integrate those. If you're interdisciplinary, you do some kind of maybe modeling of legal systems using mathematical processes. And if you're transdisciplinary, basically you're doing that together with societal stakeholders to deal with some real world societal issue. So this is what transdisciplinary science is all about. Transdisciplinarity also contributes to system understanding, just like complexity science, but in a different way. So complexity science is really still in that traditional Enlightenment view of science, where you have this objective observations of the world to understand how the world functions, and that then informs your science. Transdisciplinary science is much more about experiential, or even you could say subjective understandings of how systems are experienced. So rather than having that helicopter objective view that complexity science does, transdisciplinary really tries to understand how do people experience change within systems. And they do that through interviews, workshops, all different types of methods. And it's important because it can often improve research legitimacy. So if people are heard or felt that they're heard within the research process and can contribute to it, they feel then that the outcomes of the research have more legitimacy, especially when it includes a diverse set of people. It's also shown that when you do these kinds of approaches, although they can be quite challenging and for many different reasons, because it is in a way a lot easier to have a kind of closed system like a lab where you just do experiments. Once you start including people with all different kinds of opinions and interests, it gets messy very quick. But it does generally result in research findings that are more likely to be implied in reality. And there's a lot of research on this. And in general, transdisciplinary research tends to be context-based. So whereas in complexity science, often we want to build quite simple models and make generalizations about how the world works. Transdisciplinarity is almost always in a specific context. And so the generalizability of it is sometimes less, but the applied nature of it is higher. So it's that kind of tension. It should be pluralistic. And basically what that means is if you're trying to understand the problem of water use in the Utrecht or unsustainable water use, which is one of the topics I study, and if you just include farmers in that conversation, just interview farmers, you're not going to get a full picture of the problem. Whereas if you interview then nature managers or you interview people from the water board, you start to triangulate the problem from different ways. And so actually having a diversity of stakeholders involved really improves your system understanding in these kinds of processes. And it's generally also goal-oriented because it's about addressing some kind of challenge. Doesn't always have to be sustainability. Transdisciplinary science has been around since the 60s and applied in many different cases, but usually always around a societal challenge. And it's interactive and iterative. So generally it involves going back and forth to societal stakeholders to do that research. And ultimately the goal is to create action by applying the knowledge that's generated between scientists and societal stakeholders. Is that clear? Does everyone have a good idea then what we're talking about here? In this paper, we coined the term transdisciplinary complexity science. So, as I said, complexity science provides an objective view of how systems function through understanding structure, dynamics, and adaptive processes. Transdisciplinary science is about how systems are experienced through stakeholder engagement and what we call participatory processes, so workshops, things like that. And transdisciplinary complexity science, basically, we think, has the potential to deepen system understanding by combining this functional, let's say, helicopter objective view of systems with a more experiential understanding to create action for change. Because you can develop a really nice agent-based model of a system, and it has really nice dynamics and very interesting dynamics. But if it's not really tied to what the real world experiences are of the people within that system, likely they're going to ignore it, or it's just going to have no real connection to them and their actual lived experiences. So this is why I'm really, really passionate that complexity science is the way we need to understand the world in order to not make bad decisions, but it's not sufficient on its own. If you want to actually make real world change, you need to bring that knowledge to stakeholders and help them understand it in order to make more substantive change. So that's why from the workshop, we decided this is what we should look at. These are kind of maybe the cutting edges when we talk about sustainability science and the whole area of transdisciplinary research, which has exploded in the last decade, and complexity science. And although both of these, if you read a transdisciplinary paper, the first paragraph usually says sustainability challenges are complex and therefore we need to la 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 la. And you read a complex, of course, they also say the same thing, but they're talking about complexity in very different ways and very rarely actually integrating them. So what we wanted to do is to look at what's actually been done in this area to integrate these different types of approaches. So complexity science methods with transdisciplinary science methods. So we developed this research question and we did a systematic literature review, and this was led by Lynn. and then including all of us co-authors. And the co-authors are both from complexity science background, transdisciplinary research, and sustainability. And so we had some keywords to capture what we thought are important methods applied within complexity science, some important keywords for transdisciplinary science. You'll see a lot, a kind of flag that something is transdisciplinary is where people use this, what do you call it? I forget the supposition, is it? I'm not sure. I'm not good at grammar, but the co before something, co-development, co-learning, whatever, blah, blah, blah. That's usually someone trying to say it's transdisciplinary. And terms for sustainability. And yeah, you don't need to know that. But basically, oh, that's wrong. Nothing happening. Fun. Okay. Basically, we found, I think, 912 articles that were part of the initial filter, and out of that, I think it was 56 articles that ultimately we saw combined really complex systems methodologies with transdisciplinary science research methods. Now, it'd be great now if this could move. Yep, internet's gone. Yeah, I don't know what to do for the person online. It also won't let me. I'll just continue on like this, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, as you may have guessed with my initial introduction to complexity science, although we had quite a, we think, diverse set of keywords to filter for complexity science methods, ultimately, what was quite notable, oh, God.
Now, the hotspots of your phone and see what is working.
Yeah, hotspot, yeah, good. Yeah. Ultimately, what came out was that those three methods I mentioned were by far and away the only ones actually used, even though we looked at things like game theory, for example. It came within agent-based modeling, but not really its own major area. Although game theory is applied a lot within the area of complexity science and sustainability, not in a transdisciplinary context. Here we go. Now, that was a quick workaround. This is very important why you need to have, what's the word? Redundant systems. So we've gone through, I think, 3 different systems. They've all failed, but still have support. If this failed, we can all go home, okay? So you'll see on the right, this is called the Sankey diagram. You've probably seen it before. But we organized the results on the complexity method used, which you can see on the right, with the size being the relative amount of papers that use that complexity method. In the middle, we organized the research based on the type of, or the SDG. That was the main focus of the paper. If you don't know the SDGs, the images kind of indicate what it's about. So the first one is zero hunger. So trying to get rid of hunger in the world. 11 is sustainable and livable cities. 2 important ones for me are life below water and life on land, 14 and 15. And then on the left, this is kind of a detail of the paper that's very into the transdisciplinary science part, but I don't want to go into it too much in this talk, is that you can divide transdisciplinary research into different phases. From initiation, when you first start reaching out to stakeholders, to problem identification, knowledge co-production, and reintegration of knowledge and application of knowledge. Anyway, detail. But what we found was that agent-based modeling was very widely used, and unsurprisingly, to look at social processes. And what we found was that actually it's one of the most developed areas where you see transdisciplinary complexity science. So there's a whole field called companion modeling. And one of our co-authors, actually, Anne van Brugge, who works at RIBM, is one of the leaders in this space. And this is a very well-developed process of basically guiding the process of co-developing agent-based models with stakeholders in workshops. So that's a lot can be learned from that. System dynamics modeling was also widely applied, mostly in understanding the biophysical processes and management of those, like ecosystems, river systems, and so on. And here, approaches like causal loop mapping were often applied, or stock and flow models to do this together with stakeholders, because in most cases, most stakeholders, if you show them a partial differential equation, they freak out. So you need ways to bridge that knowledge to the stakeholders. So these kinds of approaches are used. Do people know what causal loop mapping is? No. Okay. Very common in our area. I can show you here on the board. Sorry for those online. So you have a system with variables. So variable A and variable B. And causal loop mapping describes the interactions between them. And you can have basically reinforcing or dampening interactions. So if it's like this, you have, if A increases, B increases, then A will also increase, and then you get something like exponential growth over time. And if you have an interaction that's a balancing loop, is what we call it, then you generally see over time these kinds of dynamics, stable equilibriums. And this is something that you can do with stakeholders in a workshop to describe their understanding of the system. And then you can formalize that later in a model, bring the model back to the stakeholders, and you explain, this is what we see if we formalize it like this. Does this match your understanding of the system? And they say, oh, no, it's more like this. And that helps also improve your model to that context. So causal loop mapping used a lot within system dynamics modeling. And finally, network analysis was mostly focused on structure and used a lot in workshops, and a lot focused on governance structure. So basically, in this case, you might sit with stakeholders and you say, okay, you have this stakeholder A and stakeholder B and stakeholder C, and you're like, who do you collaborate with stakeholder A in managing this system? And you might say, oh, I collaborate with stakeholder C, but not with stakeholder B. And you might say, okay, what's your agency as an institution? What are you responsible for? Are you responsible for the river or the forest? It's very simple, of course. And they say, oh yeah, we look at the river and also the forest. And basically, as you start doing this, you get quite a complex map of the governance structure within, in this case, a socio-ecological system. So you can look at who's collaborating with who to manage what natural resources. And what's nice about this is you interview individual stakeholders, and as a result, you kind of build up through these interviews a system level, basically a network map, but based on individual interviews. So it's not like you're coming in and thinking, this is how the system works from a helicopter. You're building it up from the individual knowledge and individual perspectives of how it's understood to work. This is less applied than the others, as you can see. So much more developed actually is the agent-based modeling and system dynamics modeling within this transdisciplinary space. Less of relevance for this talk, but certain SDGs you can see are relatively well represented. And certain ones we don't see any research within the space, such as the no poverty SDG, gender inequality, industry innovation and infrastructure, and so on. So that's a clear gap there. And in general, you can see here the methods are applied across the different phases of transdisciplinary research, with the initiation phase being by far the least applied. So this should be animated, but well, it's in all the issues we've had today, that's a minor one. But the benefits we saw from analyzing these papers. So in general, stakeholders, or at least the papers purported that stakeholders felt that they had developed a deeper understanding of system complexity, which is kind of what you want with this, that they start understanding these complex interactions, complex dynamics, and so on. But what was really missing in all but one paper was a formal evaluation of whether learning actually happens, which is actually a big issue with transdisciplinary research more often. So a lot of hand waving happens in that discipline about how really useful this process was for the stakeholders and stuff, but no real formal evaluation, which is a problem because it can be over optimistic in interpretation, but it also really hinders people to learn from mistakes and improve processes based on a more detailed evaluation of them. Stakeholders did report also that by co-developing the models and research, it increased their trust within the models used. But a challenge that really remained around this is stakeholders' expectations of what quantitative approaches actually are and what they should do. Because a lot of stakeholders, when they think quantitative, they think, okay, this is going to give us numbers to make decisions, for example, like integrated assessment models, for example. I don't know if any of you know those, but policy tools, let's say policy tools, where, you know, we will say, these are the inputs. We know something happens in the model. It's going to shoot out some numbers that are going to give us some legitimacy to make policy decisions, for example. In general, complexity science approaches are not focused in that area. Complexity science approaches are more about understanding how systems function, and they're not there to give you a number generally. So a system dynamics model is usually for understanding, complex dynamics within a system. And based on that, you also realize that if you start the model with all different initial conditions, you can get totally different outcomes. And so you can't say to the stakeholder, if you do this, you get that, because you know, no, it doesn't work like that. And so that's, in a way, a major barrier to integrating this, as opposed to something like integrated assessment modeling, which says, okay, we have all of these parameterizations, and we have these storylines that we base our calculations on, and under those conditions, this is the likely outcome. It's a very different way of also quantitative modeling, but quite different. In general, it was also shown to really improve the complexity science. So the science being done on how the systems are structured and functioning. Because as a scientist, you might have your own ideas about what relevant variables are for a system, or the relevant interactions between variables. But especially when we're talking about, for example, social systems, it really helps to just talk to stakeholders and get those insights. And as I said, different stakeholders will have different opinions about that. And that's really important for understanding how a system functions and is governed. It also helps define what the boundary conditions are. And this is actually also a big challenge in these is, especially in social systems, trying to work with stakeholders to define what's the boundaries of the system when social systems are by nature open systems. How do you guide stakeholders in that process? But that's actually also one of the big learning processes in these, and can actually be really helpful. And then also system indicators. So what do we actually need to measure to understand whether this system is improving or disimproving, and for whom? And that for whom is also really important, because I haven't put that in this talk a lot, but another thing about transdisciplinarity is about capturing all those diversity of perspectives is not just about improving system understanding, but also improving justice outcomes. So if you're only capturing the perspectives of the usual suspects or the powerful actors, they're likely that the way you're going to manage the system is also going to be to their benefit, and as a result, maybe unjust to others. What are some of the challenges for this emerging field? Well, that thing I was saying about complexity methods, they can be difficult to understand, just the numerical aspect of it. So you need bridging methods like causal loop mapping or something to do that, and thus you need people who have these strong facilitation skills, who are understanding how the models are working and can actually do that, but are also strong in guiding people who maybe hate numbers, and if they see a number, they just black out, because that's actually most of the population. Developing models takes time, and so in most transdisciplinary research, there's no quantitative stuff happening, and so it's all through social processes. But actually, like with what I just said, you take this model that's been developed in a workshop, you go away and formalize it in a computer model, you bring it back. That's a whole a quite involved process, and what you see is that keeping stakeholder participation over often years of model development is a big challenge. So how do you deal with that? Well, try to ensure in the beginning that you have a very good sample of the diversity of stakeholders for the relevant question, because even if individuals drop out, you can still replace them with stakeholders from that other stakeholder group. So if you only have one farmer and they drop out, maybe you're quite your model process is quite fragile. Developing models in general, and especially complexity scientists, often like to generalize, and so they like to simplify. And in any case, a model should be a simplification. But then you have that tension that you have this diversity. And actually, as I've just outlined, some of these methods are actually really well suited to dealing with diversity. But for example, system dynamics modeling can sometimes not be as strong in that, but it's also not its focus. It generally doesn't focus on capturing human decision-making processes. But network analysis, agent-based modeling are very good at capturing this diversity. So used carefully, they can really retain this diversity. And in terms of model validation, it's important to, of course, take the stakeholders' perspective into this. I won't go into this in too much detail because it's quite involved. But one thing we identified through the papers we looked and through the workshops we did, there's very little, although papers talk about justice a lot, there's very little attention to how you actually select stakeholders to be involved in these transdisciplinary processes. And if you know a bit about network science, it can dictate totally who's going to be involved. So if you think about a method that's often used, which is called snowball sampling. So you approach a stakeholder and you say, can you recommend other stakeholders to me who I should interview for this study? And every time you take a step in the network, the chance that you sample highly connected stakeholder increases exponentially. So if you're doing this kind of what's used all the time in qualitative interview approaches or data collection approaches, then you're basically going to oversample the more connected and thus the more powerful, or often the more powerful stakeholders within the system. Sometimes you want that. Sometimes you really want to include marginalized voices. And so it's very important that you understand this and you can actually use these methods within this area. Also, for example, for understanding power relations. To conclude a bit, complexity science, as I said, provides a mechanistic understanding of how systems function. It's particularly focused on structure through network analysis, complex adaptive processes, through agent-based modeling and others methods, and nonlinear dynamics. Whilst transdisciplinary science has a big area on justice, on knowledge co-production, and action. And so we highlight in the paper some potential promising areas where these can really strengthen each other in the future. So as I just mentioned, the whole issue of structure is totally intertwined with justice. So taking a much more deliberate and quantitative view on how structure within society and different systems affects justice outcomes is, I think, a big area where complexity science can contribute. Also, as I said, the formal evaluation of these whole processes and how these processes are run have the total, how you do the process obviously completely impacts the outcome of the process, but it's very understudied. And actually, I think it's for sure a complex adaptive process, these transdisciplinary processes. So this can be an interesting area of study in itself. And then we actually had the talk from Johann Schott a few weeks ago. He was talking about transition theory and how to steer complex systems in one direction or another. And that's very related, I think, to also this about understanding these dynamics of change, how you can take that knowledge to actually stimulate action for change within society. Because at the moment, a lot of the research in the around action, it's really based only in the qualitative science realm. But there's really a lot about how systems function and change that can be contributed here. And there are people beginning to do this, like the people of the tipping points community of Rockstrom and Lenton and stuff, who are taking that thing of natural change in systems and understanding how can we actually apply this to foster change in social systems. And there's, of course, social systems like the whole transition community here in the Netherlands. So summary, transdisciplinary complexity science is still very much a niche approach within the wider fields of complexity science and transdisciplinary science. Of the review papers were generally very positive for these approaches to create action for complex system change. There are well-developed approaches already in place, such as companion modeling, which really should be built upon. And it's really important that we also develop approaches to actually formally evaluate how these things are done in order that people can learn from them going forward. That's it. Thank you.